Voters are putting Trump's economic record under the microscope, and neither the president nor his allies know how to defend it. According to the Wall Street Journal, Americans are hyper aware of just how expensive their lives have become, from groceries to gas, and is chipping away at Republicans' carefully curated reputation as economic managers. There are, of course, solutions like speaking candidly about affordability on the campaign trail and validating voters' growing concerns about their financial futures. But much like the president, Republicans are explaining Trump's economy like this.
When can Americans expect relief?
The prices went up so much under Joe Biden, we totally understand why people are still frustrated.
People have short memories and they forget that Biden's economic disastrous reign led us to the much higher inflation.
Claire McCaskill, Angela Corazon, Vaughn Hilliard are still with us. Angela, we often talk about all of the former presidents who live rent-free in this president's head: Barack Obama, Richard Nixon, Herbert Hoover. I guess we can now add Joe Biden to the list.
Yeah, well, without a doubt, right? I mean, that's for sure. And I think the part that's so incredible about this whole economic thing is that under Biden, Trump and the rest of the right-wing media spend so much effort training their own people to say, don't pay attention to the stats, don't pay attention to the trend lines, only pay attention to your gut and how you feel. And right now, their entire argument is ignore everything about how you feel and also ignore the stats. And that's the position that they're currently in. All the training that they've done was through the prism of Biden, right? So they made it about Biden, and then they trained them to sort of go with the larger narrative that they were pushing, and now they're sort of trying to get them to unwind all that stuff, and they're still going back to the Biden wagon.
The thing is, even when they are presented with evidence of Trump's economic failures, the RNC director continued to defend his record. Watch this.
I think there was a delayed feeling of all that pent-up price increases, and now that we have to deal with it, this is certainly Biden's prices that we're still dealing with.
It's not Biden's tariffs. It's not Biden's war of choice with Iran. And here's the thing. Voters understand that. So there may be a subset of voters who are still so mad about the Biden years and they're such deep Trump supporters, they're going to continue to support him. Who else buys this?
Nobody. I mean, the calcified MAGA base buys it because they'll take, anything he says as gospel. But nobody else does. And, it is true that you cannot Biden made the same mistake. Biden tried to talk people out of feeling uneasy about how expensive things had gotten. And yeah, there was a lot of data points that were positive for Biden. But they made a mistake talking about the Biden economy as if that was going to be enough. The stats were going to be enough. People who look at stats are people who have a lot of money in the stock market. They're people who are not living paycheck to paycheck. The people, and by the way, we're somewhere between 40 and 60% of America is living from paycheck to paycheck. So when you try to tell those folks that everything's okay, they know you're lying.
Right. I mean, the thing we keep circling around, Vaughn, is that in the absence of actually having an economic or affordability message to sell, you have the president instead revisiting one of his favorite hits, calling Democrats communists. You had a GOP operative who told MS Now, quote, Democrats are communists isn't exactly our rallying cry, but if it keeps Trump actually focused and talking about midterms, we'll take it. I mean, that seems like a pretty low bar on message discipline, Vaughn.
Right. And this is where GOP and Trump operatives, they understand that the president is going to say what he feels like saying, and making the pitch to America that there's a new red scare in Democratic candidates as the alternative is the one that the president of the United States, the head messenger for the Republican Party, has decided to go with. And I think it's worth us pointing out, Alicia, we lived through tough inflation days in another recent midterm election. And that was 2022. But there was a stark contrast, right? I was traveling around the country from battleground states at that time when Democrats, they actually expanded their majority despite high inflation numbers that were coming out of the pandemic, that the blame was left at the feet of the Biden administration, fair or not. And it was exit polling at the time that showed that voters that said inflation was their top priority, that 70% of them voted for Republicans. But what was different, though, at that time is that there was actually efforts by the Democratic administration through the Inflation Reduction Act to address the high prices. And there were other issues that voters consistently said they felt like Democrats were trying to advance more so than Republicans. And that was from gun control reforms to immigration to efforts to restore and protect the democratic institutions. And time and again in 2022, despite inflation being high, voters on the other issues said that Democrats had their best interests in mind. And if you look at 2026 midterms, Donald Trump and the Republican majorities in the Senate and House haven't offered voters those same alternatives. And when you look at the Iran war, it has effectually hurt their ability to try to say that they are addressing price and gas price concerns. And so, unlike in 2022, Republicans don't have alternatives to effectively turn to. And instead, that's where you hear the president kind of move forward with this communist Red Scare type rhetoric.
It might help explain, Claire, why there was some really good news for Democrats in, of all places, a Fox News poll. For the first time since 2010, one of the Fox News polls finds voters citing Democrats as better on the economy than Republicans. How do they capitalize on that?
Yeah, first of all, they've got to be disciplined and stay on the message. And they should talk about the things that are real to voters, like increased health care costs. I mean, there are literally millions of people across this country that are struggling with trying to figure out how to afford health care right now, in a large part because of what Trump has done. The same thing about gas prices, the same thing about grocery prices. They need to continue, and they need to have some solutions on those things they can present to voters. But, you know, the Red Scare thing is really interesting to me because Donald Trump is trying to get away with, at the same time, being best buddies with Putin and failing to do what he needed to do to defeat Putin in Ukraine, and talking about Putin that he trusts him more than American intelligence, but he's threatened by Democrats who want universal health care as some kind of communist manifesto. I mean, Putin is the guy that believes in this more than anybody on a global stage. And Trump has no problem with Putin. Smart guy, likes him. But, boy, these Democrats who want universal health care, they're scary, scary.
We're going to wonder why it is landing with a thud. Angela Corazon, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you both so much for being with us now.